Hello, everyone. My name is Joanna Simundik with Embracing Change Therapy, and this is one of my first videos that I will be putting out in talking about trauma and various ways to heal from trauma. So today I wanted to start with our nervous system and what that looks like, and also the window of tolerance, which I will discuss at more length throughout the video. This is a series of different videos that will give you the information that you might be looking for in order to be able to heal your trauma, from traumatic experience in the past, from the comfort of your own home. So let's get started. So we're going to start talking about our healthy nervous system. So this is really, really important because this gives us the basis for understanding what traumatic experience looks like in reference to a healthy nervous system. So we have something called the autonomic nervous system, and that is composed of two branches. So the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system simply means that we need a surplus of energy to get going in the morning, for example, to get to work, to get to school, and then we need to settle and rest. So that's when the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in order to be able to create more of a relaxed state. Now, we might then need to get home from work or school. And so we're going to need, again, another surplus of energy to get our system, our bodies moving. And then when we get home, we want to relax and, get ready for bed and settle again. So then the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in. And the parasympathetic nervous system is also activated when we are looking to digest our food, because it would be quite challenging for the body to digest the food when we are in an activated state, running around or moving around. So the body needs to rest in order to digest the food, to get the nutrients and the energy from it. So this is kind of what it looks like. It's this up and down kind of motion, and that happens throughout the day, multiple times a day. This is important to know because we have two states of being that we are wired for. So we have the state of being in a threat state. So this is where we are hyper vigilant to our environment, looking out for threats. Maybe there's some potential triggers in the external environment or internal environment. For example, having a conflict with your loved one and seeing them, their face alone triggers a threat response. However, once we make up and everything is okay, then we move into the safety and connection response. And so we can't be in, we can only be in one at a time. We cannot be in both at the same time. So we kind of switch throughout the day between the safe state and the threat state. And sometimes the threat could be something small, such as getting a bill that you weren't expecting, all the way something big, like a near hit in a car accident, something of that nature, right? And so this is really important to understand, is that we are able to switch between one state or another. And the threat state will always overpower the safe state because it is linked to responding to our environment for survival. And we can always come back to the safe zone, to the safe state. And that usually happens through regulating ourselves using various self-care strategies, orienting to safety, as well as being in connection with others. So here's an interesting piece talking about the instinctual responses to threats. So we are, throughout evolution, we are wired to respond to our environment. And we have a variety of different options available to us. However, this is not something that we are conscious of and get to choose out of the menu. This really happens in milliseconds. Our bodies are wired to respond in our more primitive brain to danger without us needing to even think about it. So I don't know if you've ever been driving a car where suddenly you feel like you're going to crash, and in the last second you see yourself turning the wheel back onto the road, and you have this surplus of energy moving through you, and your mind is just slowly catching up with what's happened. Your body already responded, right? So if I had to think about whether I'm going to crash now and what should I do next, chances are I probably already had my car in the ditch. However, if I think about if I just allow my body to do what it does automatically, that's how I was able to be safe on the road and not crash, right? So we have the 4 options available to us that are most common. So we have the flight, so running away from danger, avoidance. It can look like procrastination, putting things off, avoiding confrontation. We also have the fight response. So that could show up as agitation, irritability, anger, defensiveness, something of that nature. Freeze. We have a couple different ways of freezing responses. We have a freeze response where we are bracing for danger. So if you're going, when I go hiking and I have seen a bear out hiking, that my body would go into a very hypervigilant state and very calm state, just to see kind of what the bear is going to do next before I make my move, right? So there's this kind of high freeze state, and the low freeze is more of a shutting down. So shutting down would look like just basically not collapsing and kind of going into a shutting down response, and kind of like a lifeless response rather than the hyper vigilant high freeze response. And then the last one that we see here is fawn, and fawn is simply a surrendering, a giving in, right? So if somebody's trying to rob me, and they're much bigger than me, and they're asking for my purse, I may then just give in to them and give them my purse so I can avoid further threat, because I've analyzed very quickly that I cannot overpower this person, and it's safer for me to just give in. So all of these decisions are done in milliseconds. Our body is the one that instinctively responds to this type of threat. So another one that would be important to note here is shutdown response. So this is deeper than the low freeze that we mentioned. This is when there is no escape. So this is common in childhood trauma, where as a child, we are powerless to defend ourselves from getting abused. And the only way that we can respond is by dissociating from our bodies. So it's kind of like a zoning out, numbing out. You're not really present. And this can show up in adulthood as well afterwards, because it becomes such a learned response. And with dissociation, it can definitely get a lot more complex, which I will be speaking more about it in later videos, where you can have a dissociation of the personality, which is another form of fragmentation of the personality, where there's different aspects or different parts to our personality that are not working in cohesion and can appear quite disconnected. So here I'll just briefly introduce you to the polyvagal theory. I will be speaking more about this theory in later videos. And this theory is done by Stephen Porges and his work, and important contribution to the field of trauma. And so here you see in green, this is the social engagement part of our brain, where this is the safe state that I mentioned earlier, where we feel connected, curious, present, joyful. grounded. This is where we can be curious about our environment. We can be looking for connection with others. There is no threat. And then you can see, once we get past the threshold, we can actually see that there is an increase in energy, and that can move us into a fight or flight response. So flight response usually shows up as panic, fear, anxiety, worry, restlessness. And then the fight response, typically rage, anger, irritability, frustration, irritation, agitation, anything like that. So as you can see, there's quite a lot of surplus of energy rising through the system. And then we see a shutdown. So even though it's kind of curving upwards, you could see that it starts to go into deactivation. So that's when we start to lose energy. We've been using up so much precious energy, and suddenly we have a depletion of energy. So it'll show up as numbness, depression, helplessness, powerlessness, hopelessness, shutting down, shame, dissociation, just completely collapsing. So this model is based on Dan Siegel. This is the window of tolerance that I wanted to introduce you to. There will be more videos that will speak more about how to work with this. This is really, really important to know. So as you can see, we see the natural curve of the nervous system going up and down, and that is our optimal arousal. This is when we can feel, even though things are kind of stressful and tricky, we can still manage through life. We can still get through the difficulties. And we still have clarity and concentration and ability to focus, and things feel manageable. However, once we go out of this window, as you can see at the top, the hyperarousal, which is the fight or flight responses I was telling you about, that's when we have that surplus of energy, and there's a lot of energy moving through our system, and that can show up as really, really strong emotions of fear, of anger, and just overwhelm, right? Because anytime we go out of that window, we are getting overwhelmed. And then at the bottom, you'll see when we go out of the window there, that's when we have that shutdown response. That's the previous slide in blue. And again, this is another form of threat response, and it just takes us out completely. We have no energy, we have no motivation, we feel numb, we feel depressed, we feel it's hard to take care of ourselves, we want to sleep all the time, we just don't want to do anything. And so it's really hard to function in that state as well. That's another state of overwhelm. And one important thing to consider here is that when we go out of the window, because most people, you'll see the hyperarousal first, and then you'll see a drop down into hyperarousal, because however much you come out at the top, that is how much you have to rebalance at the bottom. So in order to avoid going into hyperarousal, we actually need to pay attention when we start going out of the window into hyperarousal, right? Because what goes up must come down. And so when we actually go out of the window in the hyperarousal, we have to rebalance it out with the hyperarousal. That's where you see a lot of people kind of go into this state of anxiety and high distress. And then there's the crash. And that's when we see the hyperarousal and feeling depressed and feeling ashamed and all of that. So here's kind of what it looks like in another way, right? So here we can see the green, the regular nervous system going up and down, right? And then we see a spiking up, spiking up, spiking up. And then you see at the top, that's what the symptoms are going to look like. Anxiety, panic, exaggerated startle response, restlessness, inability to relax. Just a lot of frustration and fear. And then when we see at the bottom, that's the hyperarousal, which I mentioned earlier. As we see the depression, shame, disconnection, hopelessness, powerlessness, all of it, right? Because we actually have to rebalance it at the bottom as well, right? So some people have a tendency to ride that edge of that window, and then one little thing takes them out into overwhelm. That's where you see a lot of people with anxiety kind of show up like that. And then at the bottom, sometimes will people hit a certain peak and then go down right to the bottom and spend time there for a long period of time. That's kind of what you see as depression. And then when you see both, that's anxiety and depression symptoms alternating back and forth. And anytime you go out of the window, there's a lot of energy that is being utilized, and then there's the depletion of energy, and then need for reset. So what's really, really important here is to find a way to ensure that you do not go out of your window, because going out of your window is what creates the overwhelm. And you need that precious energy to be able to focus on your life, your school, your work, your friends, your family, your partner, your pets, your child. So, grocery shopping, cooking, cleaning, all those various things that we need throughout the day to ensure that we have enough energy. And when we go into crisis, as shown as these different types of responses, that means our system's out of balance and is looking to rebalance itself. So one thing that I will say is that when we get into that depressed state, a lot of the time it's just really allowing our bodies to reset. The body just simply needs to reset from that excess of energy that was utilized in the fight and flight response in the red here. So that's something really, really important to consider, and I will be speaking more about that in the next video. So this is the end of this video. I hope you found it informative. There's definitely a lot of rich information there. However, get a sense of how it applies to you, and if you have any questions, feel free to connect by commenting on the video, as well as private messaging me. And I'll do my best in responding to give you a little bit more information as to how that applies to you. And the next video I plan to create is talking a little bit more about this window of tolerance. What does it mean when we go out of the window? And how do we prevent ourselves from going out of the window so that we can actually move away from being in crisis and be able to regulate our nervous system, regulate our emotional reactions and body sensations in conjunction with our environment. And just mainly to feel in control of our lives and find the ability to thrive rather than just live in survival. Living in survival is not the quality of life that we are looking for. And once we regulate ourselves, then we will be able to feel more wholesome and alive, because now we can direct our energy towards other things that might be more beneficial, such as changing careers, or taking that mindfulness class, or being able to find the right partner, or to have more time for your children, or be more productive at work. So there's many, many different ways that we can put that energy in when we're not moving from crisis to crisis. So that's my video for today. I hope you enjoyed it. And let me know how these videos are for you. I'd be happy to receive any feedback you have so that we can kind of keep improving these videos. And I look forward to hearing from you. All the best, and have a lovely rest of your day.